people seek out the people that make them feel like they are the only customer out there. And that's been a challenge for my company, because when you try to do that at scale, it doesn't really work very well.
It's
so
very hard.
Even for myself, I know that long term, is my business going to blow up to $10 million? Probably not.
Right.
Is it going to be where I can have relationships with 30 to 40 customers and talk to them on a weekly basis and be their relationship manager? But I think when you run a smaller business and when you are in a sales or account management position, either within that business or as a part of that small business, focusing on making those folks feel in the best way alone, if you will, like that is what I think is the secret to that.
Great experiences build great leaders. Great leaders build great teams. This is Building Great Sales Teams.
All right, guys, welcome back to Building Great Sales Teams. We're excited. We're still here at the Babs Summit. I'm incredibly excited about this next guest because he is an award-winning podcast host and founder of Westport Studios and host of B2B Business Class. And when I was looking at his LinkedIn profile to do a little research for this episode, I realized you had the top podcasting voice designation. How do you even get that?
Well, it's really great to be here, Doug. And that is one of those things I worked on, not tremendously hard at first, but like it was something that when LinkedIn first introduced their AI question feeds, that I said, okay, this is a great way for me to leverage my expertise and get in front of more people. So it's one of these little things, and that I come from a sales background. Prospecting, if you will, every day helps big time, but also answering one question a day for me was how I actually got that badge. And I was stunned when I got it, because I know some people who are like answering every question every day. And
I didn't even know this existed.
Really? Oh, yeah. They rolled this out, I want to say 6 to 12 months, somewhere in the last year. And it's up across all topics. It's not just the AI asking, hey, if you have a podcast, this, what do you do about this? It's leadership, management, all sorts of things. And I enjoy it because it's a great platform. I will say that LinkedIn has a little ways to go as far as like making the questions good. Right. And of course, you're also kind of training their AI for free. So it's one of those things, caveat emptor, buyer beware, things like that. But I found that the greatest connection that I've gotten from that is that people see me all the time with that little light bulb badge, which is super cool. And it takes a little while.
Differentiates you.
Yeah, it totally does. Yeah. And it's also introduced me to other people who, like you and I, are kind of at the top of, I won't say I'm at the top of the game, but like people who also are that interested in elevating other people's podcasts and being a resource for industries like that. So
gotcha.
Makes
a ton of sense. And obviously you were born with this voice, but have you actually like taken any voice classes or like worked on this a little bit?
So I'm 50-50. My parents would be very proud of this. My mom is a wonderful singer, and that's where the tone and the timbre of my voice comes from. But I also got a great education from the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse. I had some very dedicated, amazing professors there who let me shine. Initially, I wanted to be a newscaster. So they're like, dude, get on the college campus news. Let's make it happen. And a lot of this was a big push for me to develop what I had been given by existing, and then, but also to wordsmith that, if you will, or develop those skills to not be as raw, I guess.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. I mean, you don't just, yes, you have the raw materials like anybody else. It's a talent, but you got to work on it, right?
Right. So. And the one thing I should say is, I didn't spend 20 hours a week inside of a booth going like ba 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 ba, things like that. But it's it's one of those things. And I always love to sing too. So that's and on that front, my mom is not or is a professional trained singer. I am not.
Okay.
I know we have a karaoke contest here at this thing in a day or two. You guys will see
Fantastic.
that. You'll see some of that. Which
I'm
will be
looking
fun.
forward to it.
It's a good
Nobody
time.
wants to see me up there, but I'm excited to see you.
Come on.
All right, so you're from Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Okay. And so we were talking a little bit before the show that I was actually there when Des Bryant caught that ball.
Yeah. He's one of the greatest. What do you call it? Most significant moments in infamous moments in Wisconsin history. That's right up there with John Dillinger running bootleg booze across Lake Winnebago, and any of the various things that have happened over the course of the 150 years the state has existed. But the most notorious, the most nefarious, the most probably impactful if you talk to the average Wisconsinite and tell them, hey man, remember that time that they caught the player, not the ball? And people will get like veins in their neck outraged about that, which is kind of funny. I mean, my wife still goes off about it. Funny side story. We actually, we didn't head to that game, but we went to and this is maybe how I've grown as a person, but my wife is such a diehard Packer fan that I didn't realize it the first 4 or 5 years of our marriage.
Really?
So when they got tickets to the playoff game against the Niners in, I want to say that was 2013 or something like that.
Okay.
We went and actually, a friend of mine called her to be like, hey, can Rob go to the game? And she's like, I don't know. You call him and figure it out. Yeah. And so I'm like, oh, Katie, can I go to the game? And she looks at me. We're painting a room. And she goes, I don't know. Can you go to the game, Rob? I'm like, well, yeah, I certainly can. And she goes, I don't know where the F you've been for the past 5 years, but I love the Green Bay Packers. I would like to go with you.
Yeah, exactly. How could you not ask me?
Exactly. Oh, gosh, it was so funny. So we figured something out, and it was great. It was one of the greatest moments of my marriage, but also shows you how dedicated people are as Packer fans in Wisconsin, that it's really meaningful.
You know what was crazy to me is how great a time we had. We just had an amazing time despite that. It's like we weren't even mad at the end of the game because the people were fantastic.
Yeah.
We had a blast. It wasn't, I guess the nemesis is the Bears, right? So if that happened at Soldier Field, we probably would have had a sour taste in our mouth. But the people were so amazing that we had a great time. We had some cheese curds. We went to a cigar bar after that and had a good time. And so I just have great memories of that trip, despite the Cowboys losing, obviously.
Right, yeah, and it's one of those crazy things too of just looking at how you experience an NFL game, no matter where you are. It's one of the most. It's a fan base that travels well. I've gone with them to Cincinnati and stuff like that. It's great. It's fun to be a Packer fan.
So Westport Studios has a story behind it, and I caught a glimpse of it, and I wanted to wait to hear it from you for the first time. And so it kind of starts in 2020. Yeah. And you had $26 to your name, and I'll let you take it from there.
So that feisty Packer fan I'm married to is also like the world's greatest budgeter. I do not know how this woman does this.
Okay.
But when I lost my job working at a major HVAC contractor in 2020, there was a moment where it was like, oh shit. And like, what are we going to do? Because at that point in time, a third of the world was out of work. Yeah. And I mean, we hadn't seen levels of unemployment that were happening at that point in time since the Great Depression. And without sounding too doom and gloom or paranoid, I thought we were kind of headed for another, like, hey man, it's 10 years of garbage here, and it's going to take something major to pull us out. So I said to myself, after I had taken a nice, well-deserved 2-week vacation, and that was a good time. You getting up way late, drinking too much beer, playing video games until the cows came home. But I said to myself, Rob, somebody's going to talk to you someday when you get another job, and you better have a good story to tell.
Right.
And so I wanted to start something that would help other people. And that was the concept for a show called Recruiting Hell. And Recruiting Hell was a show to help people get jobs, because there was no better time in the world or in history other than, 1935 or so to start a podcast about helping people get jobs. That particular show was kind of my first foray into this. It was amateur, it was self-taught, self-edited and everything like that. But the resources I had at the time were an old clunky gaming PC a microphone that, I mean, obviously we are talking into these fabulous Sures here.
Right.
It was a headset. I think it was $25 from Best Buy.
Mm-hmm.
And I had $26 in my wallet. And that was all I had to go on to make this first podcast. And it was also such tough times too, that, this is when times get tough, sometimes you have to look of what part of yourself you can sell. And for some people, that is something very different, but I sold my voice.
I was wondering where this was going.
Yes. But I sold my voice.
Okay.
And I got little tiny bits of resources from that.
Okay.
And so we refueled all of this back in here. And by the time Recruiting Hell was over, 69 episodes later, we had helped our listeners find over $1.5 million in jobs and benefits to help get them back to work. We even had a guy who got hired by the CIA, which is wild.
That's fantastic.
It was just fun, but it was really cool to see that success story because he was actually a veteran who had become disabled.
Okay.
And they said, man, you can't hack your current job anymore because you've lost the requisite hearing you need.
Yeah.
And so they're like, well, let's get you into something else, but you need to interview for it. Okay. So he gave me his resume, and I said, well, this isn't something I do normally, but if you change these few things from what I've learned from talking to people on my podcast, it may help you.
Yeah.
And sure enough, he works at Langley now, which is really cool.
That's a great example of, I think this will be episode 309 or so.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I've done about, I want to say 250 guest episodes, somewhere around there. And the just plethora of information that I've learned from my guests. I mean, it's like a self-development course that you facilitate. That
is one of my favorite things about actually running my company is that I work with all these customers across various industries, different verticals, things like that. I have like a better than college level course taught to me every day by listening to my customers. Now, fast forward to the new version of Westport was that when we sort of sunset Recruiting Hell, I had actually gotten hired by another agency to produce podcasts professionally.
Beautiful.
And suffice to say, I spent about a year and change with those folks. There were some major things in the background that went wrong there. Okay. So 10 of us got the axe in March 2022. And I said, maybe we should continue this path and
now that you know what not to do.
Exactly. And it's funny you mentioned that because I did actually, I had a mentor early in life who taught me a lot of great things to do about business.
Okay.
I also saw this company and I have call it the white book and the black book of the things to do and the things not to do.
Sounds like in my 20s and my 30s.
Right. Right. But in that case, those two books I look to tremendously for how I run my company, how I treat my people, and things like that. And of course, we've had the opportunity. One of the most humbling things that happened to me in my career was when I was let go from that company. Mm-hmm. Within 5 months, every single one of my customers moved their show from my old employer to me. It was one of the most humbling things in my life of like, hey, we'd like to get rid of this company and come spend time with you because you've taken care of us.
From a sales perspective, why do you think that is?
I think people seek out the people that make them feel like they are the only customer out there. And that's been a challenge for my company because when you try to do that at scale, it doesn't really work very well.
It's very hard.
Even for myself, I know that long term, is my business going to blow up to $10 million? Probably not.
Right.
Is it going to be where I can have relationships with 30 to 40 customers and talk to them on a weekly basis and be their relationship manager? But, I can't edit their audio. That's why I have people who are better at things like that. But I think when you run a smaller business and when you are in a sales or account management position, either within that business or as a part of that small business, focusing on making those folks feel incredibly, in the best way, alone, if you will, that is what I think is the secret to that, and making sure that you give them that personalized attention and say, hey, I hand every single one of my customers my personal cell phone because I want them to call me. I had a guy call me, one of the hosts from one of my customers called me, what was it, Friday afternoon. He goes, Rob, I think I deleted my studio. And I said, oh my God, like, let me help you.
Yeah.
Like, let me get you helped
How do you
out.
delete your studio?
That was, I'm not exactly sure how that happened, but, so I got a hold of the guy who held his account and everything like that with Riverside FM.
Yeah.
And it got restored. But the fact that he had the ability to be like, yo, man, like, you're the top dog and I got you on the horn right now. Let's fix this. And being there for him too, in a time where, he had, I'm trying to think how many episodes Shane has under his belt. He's got 20 or 30 episodes under his belt.
Yeah.
And to see that all go into the ether, like, oh my gosh, it's gone. And to be able to reassure him on the back end, like, number one, we back up all the files anyway, but like,
I was
it's like,
gonna
dude, it's
say.
okay. If it's gone, it's okay.
Yeah.
Like, I want you to know that the hard work that you've done is there, but the ability to, kind of fix that like that for a customer is what I think really leads to a success of a small business.
I love it. And it makes a ton of sense because you're so focused on the customer experience. That is going to create more sales in itself.
Right.
One of the things that I do with my clients is, especially after we've built out a sales program. So after we do that, and if they push me into like a fractional CSO role or something like that, the first thing I focus on is the customer experience. We audit the whole thing, and then we go into the sales rep experience after that.
Right.
And when those two things are jiving, the business is scaling. 100%.
Right. And it's funny you mentioned the sales rep experience right after that, because my lovely wife, who I adore and have talked about way too much this episode probably, she has this phrase: feed your people or they will eat your customer.
Oof. That's it for a little bit. Feed your people or they will eat your customer. Explain the eating your customer part.
So if you have unhappy people that are working on a project for your customer and you're not treating them right, they will erode that customer relationship, whether intentionally or unintentionally, and that customer will eventually be consumed by your lack of care for your team.
No, I couldn't agree more.
Feed your people or they will eat your customer.
So when I was building my sales org, I did that for 13 years, and we did mainly door-to-door, about 70%
Ooh,
door-to-door.
D2D's tough, man.
Yeah.
That's, wow.
Well, we had like 110 sales reps at one point.
That's a lot of people.
Yeah, that's why the podcast is called Building Great Sales Teams, because that's my consulting expertise, right? But one of the things we made sure is that our staff was incredibly well paid and incredibly happy, because our customer was actually the sales rep. It wasn't our clients, AT&T, Vivint, Security, or Solar. That it was the sales rep, because that's where our income was from commission. It wasn't from the fulfillment or the product, right? And so the sales rep experience had to be flawless, and the people that made it flawless was our staff. And so our staff is who we fed incredibly well. Obviously the sales rep, they got bonuses, they got commission, they had a management structure.
Right.
That was first, but our staff was the key player that kind of made that whole thing tick.
Yeah.
Supporting them, being there for them, solving their issues, getting their payroll right, making sure that they had, HR and that they were compliant and that they had everything they needed. It was huge, so couldn't agree more. And we should talk about your wife more. She's a smart lady.
Dude, people marry, one settles, one reaches.
Yeah.
I did not settle.
Same here, brother. Same here. Same here. So, speaking of the sales experience, when we look at that can make or break some of the best relationships and the best clients, right? And you approach podcasting from a sales perspective.
Yes.
And so walk us through how, as a podcaster, you can identify your avatar, bring them on the show, and not make them feel icky afterwards by basically pitching them right after the show's over.
Oh, man.
Because I know you got to deal with that a little bit. For clients that expect you to set that up for them.
Right. And that's one of the biggest things, is that you don't want this used car salesman kind of thing, like, hey, come on my podcast and then we'll pitch you afterwards. Nobody likes that. Nobody wants that. Nobody likes to be pitched at all. But what we like to frame up for folks is a niche industry show that has your ideal customers as guests. And this works really well. I'm going to use an example of a customer we had for a long time. They run a higher education marketing agency.
Okay.
So they interface with universities to help them market. They've started a show, simply enough, called The Higher Ed Marketer. It's a very easy name for people to remember if they are a higher ed marketer. Just Google what you are or Spotify what you are. But they have that show put together for the industry as a niche watering hole for both people above in the industry and below in the industry.
Okay.
It sits kind of in the middle. And so what they've done to make this not feel sales pitchy is create a place where experts come for exposure
Okay.
and where people who are either up and coming or need the help for their, mid-sized D2, D3 university or even something smaller, a micro university, come to them because they say, oh man, you guys had, Ethan Braden from Texas A&M on. He's a rock star of higher ed marketing. We should probably implement some of his strategies, but we kind of don't know how. But you talk to him, hosts of the Higher Ed Marketer. It sounds like you might know a lot more about this than we do, and so it creates that wonderful little familiarity between audience, hosts / sponsor / person who's putting on the show in the hopes of creating business relationships out of it, and then also the experts too, because sometimes those folks need an extra set of hands as well. So it creates this entire thing that centralizes a niche audience that feeds from multiple directions. And there is a sales process to it at the back end.
Okay.
But this is all relational development first. There is a pivot question at some point. And again, depending on what you set up as a cadence for talking to people.
Okay.
That can be anywhere from a few months in to maybe 6 months in, where you talk to your former guests and say, hey man, I was just, had a guest on recently who reminded me of something that you and I talked about that you mentioned was a problem when you were on our show.
This is post episode.
This is post. Yep. This is, and not next week, not 3 days after. This is many months post, as you've had time to cultivate that relationship through social media and additional follow-ups and things like that.
Is that SOP? Is that part of the process?
It is part of the process. It generally varies for each customer a little bit. There is
So you more give it to them. You don't facilitate that part, right?
I don't facilitate that because I don't want them building a relationship with me.
No, for sure.
So
I was just thinking, like my VA team does all my posting.
Yeah.
And then in some groups, they'll go in and comment my podcast episode as answers to problems,
Sure.
And so I didn't know if like y'all did anything in that realm.
We tend to stay very hands off that as a company, like advising on it. Sure. Yeah. But
So you just give them the roadmap basically,
right.
and they have to execute it.
Yeah. Give them that kind of twist question of, Doug, you came on my show a few months ago and you mentioned that X and Y were problems for your sales team. Did you know that we can fix X? And that is a very dumbed down version of that question because it's very unique for each person, but that's the general formula, if you will. And
by the way, I want to pause there.
Go ahead.
And I want you guys to rewind the podcast about 10 seconds and re-listen to what he just said, because that is a great prospecting script right there, especially for existing relationships. So thank you for that.
Right, yeah, sure, absolutely. Yeah. And it works too. That's the thing is I've seen for some of our customers, they've had a relationship with that pivot question as fast as 8 weeks, which is tremendously fast for this. Podcasting is a long play. You know this. You've been doing this 309 times.
Yeah.
Podcasting is a long game. And for somebody to have success like that in the first 2 months, that is wonderful. That was actually a customer of ours who was in the higher ed tech space. They got to talk to Vanderbilt University about I can't remember how big the potential contract was, but it was mid 6 figures, which made their return on investment for their show like I'd never seen somebody get an opportunity at ROI that fast with a podcast.
I'm sure we have so many samples, but I had one that just happened on Monday, right?
Ooh.
And it was a fractional offer from a sustainability company, and he gave me the offer or whatever. And then afterwards, he's like, hey, by the way, I listened to your podcast. And that episode about X, Y, and Z was fantastic. I actually sent it to our business development manager, and he's going to start implementing it now. And so I've been able to give them value before I even accepted their offer, So.
Yeah. And, gosh, think about how you give if you give somebody, there's a reciprocity thing there too, that we know from sales and whatnot.
Yeah.
But there's also this like, man, this guy, he has revolutionized our sales process with something he gave us for free. Imagine what happens if we pay him. So that's where I see podcasting being such a pillar for especially relational sales. Transactional, not as much, but like relational sales. If you sell a product that is over, $50,000 to $100,000 a year, whether it's a software platform or anything like that, I really think that there's that pivot question is your key to a lot of really great relationships. I've seen that unlock everything from, small micro universities to MasterCard for customers, which is awesome.
Beautiful. And what you're talking about there is high ticket, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to pay someone 50 to 100 grand within a year for a product, a service, a software, there is a bevy of information, resources, just knowledge that you have that could be 300 episodes of a podcast.
Yeah.
And so when I started mine, the first 2 episodes were on the principles of which I build sales teams. And so the first 2 episodes were around Kodak. The first episode was the first 3 letters, and then the second episode was the last 2.
Yeah.
And so even if somebody comes to me and they say, hey, I need help, and they can't afford me, or they're not ready for my kind of help yet, they haven't even hired their first salesperson or whatever the case is, I can send them to those first 2 episodes.
Yes.
And so you create a resource for impact, which is, unselfish, in my mind. And it's wild, and again, I guarantee we both have a bunch of these stories, but I went to a Christmas light convention a couple months ago.
A Christmas light convention?
Yeah, it's called Clipicon, right? And I went to speak about sales strategies and stuff like that. And there was a B2B Christmas lighting company there, and their top salesperson came to me and said, I have listened to every episode of your podcast. I was like, I don't even know who you are.
Yeah.
And he said, we've implemented a lot of your strategies, and we've grown our sales team from 2 people to 7 people now, and from 1.5 to 6.5. Wow. Yeah. And it was just like the moment for me, right? Because I'm not Joe Rogan here. You know what I mean? I've got about 50,000 downloads or so, right?
Sure.
And so that was the first time that happened. Somebody walked up to me. I didn't know him before. There wasn't a relationship before. And they told me something like that. And it was probably one of the greatest moments of my life.
Yeah.
And they didn't pay me to do it, But it was so much more fulfilling than even clients sometimes, because it was like I didn't even know it existed.
And that person chose to spend their time with you.
Yeah.
Because you gave them such substantial value.
Mm-hmm.
And that I think is the most amazing power of podcasting, whether it's for entertainment or for business development or for education or anything like that. The fact that somebody can pick and choose how to spend their time with you, even in a pre-business relationship, that's awesome. And that's what I enjoy doing.
It's like you said earlier, it's humbling.
Yo, totally. Yeah.
It's so cool.
Because there's only one thing in this world we don't get more of,
Time.
Doug, and it's time. We
100%.
can make more money, we can do more things, everything else. The one thing we have a finite amount about is time. And we don't even know how much we technically have,
Okay, so if someone wants to implement this strategy that you're talking about, which I love the way you do it, it's post-show. You've provided the value already. Mm-hmm. The law of reciprocity starts digging in a little bit, doing what it does. But you give them a roadmap in order to maintain that relationship afterwards, which I can honestly say I'm terrible at. It's like once you're on my show, we send you the clips and everything, and then maybe you'll get invited back for like an anniversary episode.
Oh, sure, yeah.
But that's something that I am definitely going to take from this is the continuing the relationship afterwards, making sure those connections stick. Right. If this is something that one of the listeners hears and like, hey, I need to implement this as part of my prospecting strategy, where do they go to do that?
I think the first place to go is just watch some of the stuff that I do on social media. I'm talking about what I do all the time, but tune into a show. Tune into a show that is in a niche industry. I think that's the first place they should go and just see like, how does this work? Again, higher ed marketer is a great example, just to see how those guys talk to their guests, because there's no expectation of working together there. But if you're beyond that step of, okay, now I kind of understand this, you can You can always look me up via my LinkedIn content, of course. I love having folks follow me on that because that's, again, it's that convention thing that you said, like, I didn't know you existed, but now I do.
Yeah.
And now we can build a relationship. The other part of that, too, is we actually just redid our website a couple days ago. So Westport Studios, LLC.com. And,
Very
of
cool.
course, more than happy to set up a time with anybody to just, one of my favorite things in life is teaching people how to podcast, whether for business or pleasure. That is one of my favorite things. And I always say that my shows have kids, and there are all of these little podcasts out there, whether they are, again, business or something else, that can trace their roots back to either B2B Business Class, my current show, or all the way back to Recruiting Hell. And they've both got quite a few kids, which is kind of funny. So I always love that. But yeah, check us out. And, that's one of the things that we specialize in is the B2B podcasting that is quantifiable for ROI, which is tough to do because podcast analytics suck.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, but it's also, like you said, if you're running this through a CRM, you can see the ROI.
Yes,
right
correct.
there.
Yeah, and that's...
And all you need is one,
Exactly.
I've probably had maybe 2 or 3 clients come from the actual podcasting because I'm not intentional about it like you coach your clients to be. And it's more of the, building the authority and the content and stuff like that. But the clients that have come from it have been fantastic.
Right.
And they paid for it for the next 10 years.
and that's the kind of return that you're looking at is customer of mine. They landed MasterCard. You could cold call that MasterCard until you died, and you'd never get to the person who was the buying decision maker for a legal software. You'd never reach the general counsel. You'd be thrown into every voicemail in the universe for the rest of time. But if you invite that person on a podcast called Innovative Legal Leadership, they come on and they open their world to the host, who just happens to be the person that they need to make a relationship with.
That's a great podcast name, too.
Yeah, it's a fabulous.
Not as obvious as building great sales teams, but
right.
Fantastic nonetheless. I'm going to be a guest on Innovative Legal Leadership. That sounds important.
Right, exactly. And it's that's a fun part about it, too, is that you can always tailor those titles, but always keep them as simple as you can, because that's what people look for.
100%. Yeah, the guy that I told the story about in the Christmas light business, he looked up building sales teams, and my show came up first.
There you go.
Great sales
there's
teams.
a reason mine is called B2B Business Class, because if you type in B2B, my show's probably going to be one of the first ones there.
I love it.
Which is cool.
All right, last question.
Go for it.
I'm big on legacy.
Ooh.
What does legacy mean to you, and what legacy do you want to leave behind?
I am so glad you asked this question. I don't have any kids.
Okay.
I don't know if that'll change at any point in time. I live in a small town on the shore of Lake Michigan.
Okay.
We are located in the wealthiest county in my state of Wisconsin. But there are still issues in my community like hunger and homelessness. There's a wonderful shelter. Shout out to the folks at Port Light and Family Promise of Ozaukee County. There's a shelter for folks to help them live better lives and get back into the workforce that is 2 blocks from my house. I received a call the other day from one of my local connections. She said to me, Rob, her name is Julia. She said to me, Rob, my pastor at church today said that Family Promise and the Port Light Shelter are 4 meals short this week. I am leaving this. I'm just letting you know. I don't expect you to do anything about it, but I'm leaving this here just so you're aware. And I said, Julia, I will see what I can do, because I cannot abide there being people going hungry 200 yards from my house. I want to build a better community for not just myself, but I don't want to live in a community that has kids who go hungry and don't get a chance to perform in school and don't get a chance to get a good education. I don't want to live in a dumb town. I want to live in a town that I've helped change for the better. I had a mentor, as I mentioned earlier, the man with the white book. He did this incredible thing for a neighboring city, which is much larger than my town, 3, 4, 5 times the size. He sponsors everything, absolutely everything. And he has made West Bend, Wisconsin, a better place. Big shout out to Tim Schmidt. But I want to do that for my town, because we have the capabilities. That's the legacy I want to leave. I always tell my wife, don't make me into a bench. Do something for the community. Do something that will help people long after I'm gone. Dude, I want to plant more trees that I will never sit in the dang shade of than anybody else I know, because that is what my business is about. My business is a weapon to fight the great evils of the world, like hunger and homelessness, on my front door, or at my front door. I don't even have to go anywhere. It's 200 yards down the street.
That was a top 10 answer. I've done over 300 episodes and asked that question.
As you can tell, I feel, I feel pretty
times.
charged up about it.
Well, and that's the beautiful thing was I can hear the conviction in your voice. This is not a boilerplate answer, like impact the world and leave a legacy behind. No, you're very specific. And I think that's important when it comes to legacy is you have to be specific with it. And here's the deal. You don't even have to be that big of a success in order to make the impact you want to make.
Exactly, because that ask that Julia made of me was $200. That's it. But I ran a check right down that way, and I said, I heard you guys are 4 meals short this week. I can't let that stand. I can't let that happen 200 yards from my house. That's the kind of world I want to live in, where there's more people like that, Doug. There's more people who say, I have the ability to impact other people's lives, and the world needs more heroes. And I'm not a hero, but I think the world needs more people who think like heroes.
I love it, brother. I can't thank you enough for coming on the show.
Oh,
and we'll be sure to include those links in the podcast notes of the charities that you talked about.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And if you can do anything, forget to like and the share. Just go and donate $5, $10, whatever you guys can do. Thanks again.
Thank you, Doug. Really appreciate it, man.
All right, let's get building.